Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're unpacking what is arguably the ultimate paradox of modern global power, and that's American military might. I mean, on paper, the United States is this unstoppable force, right? A technological giant capable of just unparalleled destruction. Yet, when you look on the ground, in the history books, and especially in ongoing conflicts, a completely different picture emerges. It's the picture of a strategic dwarf. We're going to look at exactly how a nation can be so exceptionally strong at starting wars, yet so fundamentally incapable of ending them.
Okay, let's dive into this. $895 billion. Just wrap your head around that for a second. That is the annual defense budget of the United States. It accounts for about 40% of the entire global total. With this colossal funding, America maintains over 800 military bases spread out across 159 countries. They're operating 11 aircraft carriers, which, by the way, is more than the rest of the world combined. They've got the most advanced stealth bombers, drones, and precision-guided munitions humanity has ever seen. It's a level of technological and logistical dominance that is, quite literally, unprecedented in human history.
But, this brings us to a really staggering question, and it's the core focus of our explainer today. Despite this unmatched, overwhelming technological superiority, why hasn't America actually won a major war since 1945? From the jungles of Southeast Asia to the deserts of the Middle East, the nation consistently fails to achieve strategic, lasting victories. They totally dominate the initial battles, for sure, but they ultimately lose the wars.
Section 1. The Ultimate Power Paradox, a history of unending conflicts.
To understand how we arrived at the current global gridlock, we really just need to look at the track record of modern American warfare. It's a continuous story of unending conflicts. When you lay out the timeline of post-World War II interventions, it essentially looks like a domino fall of quagmires. The U.S. spent 11 years fighting in Vietnam, ultimately fleeing in defeat. Decades later, they spent 20 grinding years in Afghanistan. Then, 8 devastating years in Iraq. They intervened in Libya and Syria, sparking instability that's lasted over 15 years now. And this whole historical chain reaction, it leads us directly, without interruption, to the current ongoing gridlock of the 2026 Iran war. The pattern here is completely undeniable.
Just look closely at the devastating 20-year war in Afghanistan. It was essentially a carbon copy of the strategic failures in Vietnam. In both of these conflicts, the U.S. imposed local regimes that the population viewed as deeply corrupt and autocratic. Meanwhile, the enemy forces, whether that's the Viet Cong or the Taliban, were largely viewed by locals as native defenders fighting off foreign occupiers. And in both wars, early opportunities for political negotiations were completely ignored. Back in 2001, the U.S. actually rejected an initial offer from the Taliban to surrender. It was a profound misstep that doomed the region to decades of bloodshed, ending with massive military casualties and this panicked, chaotic exit where forces had to flee as the enemy just took the capital.
Then, of course, came Iraq in 2003. This was a war famously launched on the false premises of weapons of mass destruction and non-existent ties to al-Qaeda. Now, while the initial invasion was a rapid tactical success, they toppled Saddam Hussein in mere weeks, it created a massive power vacuum. This total lack of a post-invasion plan unleashed sectarian civil war, it paved the way for the rise of ISIS, and it actually empowered regional rivals like Iran. The human toll was absolutely catastrophic. We are talking about over 1 million lives lost in the resulting chaos.
Section 2. Winning Battles, Losing Wars, the Blueprint of Failure. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the core mismatch it highlights. If the U.S. has the best military in the world, why does this keep happening? It comes down to conventional versus guerrilla warfare. The U.S. is the undisputed master of conventional combat. Tank battles, air superiority, concentrated force, you name it. But against guerrilla fighters who hide among civilian populations and use rugged terrain, that conventional might is severely blunted. You literally cannot bomb a guerrilla fighter hiding in a village without killing civilians, which in turn just creates more enemies. The U.S. relies so heavily on search and destroy tactics and body counts, but against an irregular force fighting for its homeland, military might alone is entirely useless.
And this creates a vicious, repeating sequence that traps the U.S. military time and time again. Let's walk through it. Step 1. They invade with overwhelming technological superiority and totally win the initial phase. Step 2. They fail to establish any sort of post-invasion or peace plan. Basically, they know exactly how to topple a regime, but not how to rebuild a society. Step 3. They struggle with unclear or constantly shifting political goals. Are they hunting terrorists, building a democracy, securing weapons? The mission just constantly changes. Finally, Step 4. They become trapped. Because they treat war strictly as a military problem rather than a political one, they find themselves stuck in a quagmire with no viable exit strategy, totally terrified of leaving because of the chaos that might follow.
So, if the cycle is so glaringly obvious, why keep starting these unwinnable wars? Well, the answer is a toxic mix of domestic and psychological drivers. First off, the military-industrial complex profits immensely from prolonged conflicts. Then there's this dangerous hubris, an overconfidence that advanced technology is somehow going to magically solve complex geopolitical issues. Leaders also have a tendency to view severe conflicts as quick, easy excursions, which is a term explicitly used by recent leadership to describe the current Iran war. Combine all of that with short-term political thinking driven by election cycles and a severe case of historical amnesia regarding past failures, and the stage is perfectly set for continuous warfare.
Now, wait a minute, you might be asking. Didn't America win the World Wars and the Gulf War? Yes, but context is everything here. In World War I, the U.S. actually arrived late, in 1917. They provided the turbo of supplies and fresh troops, but France and Britain were the backbone that had already bled the enemy for 3 years. In World War II, America decisively won the war in Asia, absolutely, but the Soviet Union, absorbing horrific casualties and destroying 80% of the German army on the Eastern Front, won the war in Europe. Even the 1991 Gulf War, which is arguably the last true American victory, was achieved alongside a massive 34-nation coalition with a clear UN mandate and strictly limited goals: liberate Kuwait, but do not march on Baghdad. They only pull off major victories when fighting as part of massive global coalitions against conventional armies.
Section 3. The 2026 Iran Reality, the Current Quagmire.
Which brings us directly to the present day. The ongoing Iran war is absolutely not some hypothetical scenario. It is the culmination of every single historical failure we've discussed so far, unfolding right in front of us right now. Let's trace the timeline. On February 28, 2026, the US and Israel launched an unexpected military attack on Iran, targeting nuclear and missile facilities. The shocking part? This aggressive escalation happened while diplomatic negotiations were still actively underway, making the attack militarily unnecessary at that exact moment. By March, predictable chaos ensued as regional proxies in Yemen and the Gulf heavily retaliated. By April, global flight routes and trade were severely disrupted. And by June, just 3 months in, the conflict is totally gridlocked, with absolutely no clear end in sight.
And as you'd expect, this regional escalation has caused massive economic shocks worldwide. Think about this. 20% of the world's oil flows right through the Strait of Hormuz. With the region in active conflict, this vital choke point for the global energy supply has been critically threatened. It's sending energy prices skyrocketing back to levels we literally haven't seen since the 1970s.
So the crucial point is that the current leadership is completely trapped in the exact same historical cycle we just mapped out. They have entirely contradictory goals. Some officials want to merely strike nuclear sites, while others are pushing hard for total regime change. But here is the hard reality. Regime change is mathematically impossible without a massive, bloody ground invasion. And a ground invasion that is politically and militarily entirely undesired by the public. Because they initiated this conflict without a post-bombing plan, they are now just stuck. They can't achieve their maximum goals, and they have no diplomatic exit strategy without suffering a severe loss of face on the world stage.
And make no mistake, the rest of the world is watching this 2026 failure very, very closely. Russia is openly stating that U.S. military power is essentially a facade, arguing that their inability to defeat guerrilla forces proves they aren't a true threat on the ground. China is pointing to the 37 million refugees created by U.S. conflicts since 2001 as undeniable proof that American hegemony is failing and bringing only chaos. Even close allies like the United Kingdom have shifted their stance, noting that while America obviously remains a vital partner, the era of viewing them as an uncontested superior military superpower, that era is over.
There's this poignant quote from former Secretary of State Henry Kissinger that really hits the nail on the head here. He said, "America is the only country that cannot win a war but cannot end one either." It is the defining feature of a nation that views complex, deeply rooted political and social issues entirely through the crosshairs of a weapon system. Which leaves us with one final provocative question as we watch the events of 2026 continue to unfold. Will the ultimate technology giant ever learn from its historical amnesia to stop being a strategic dwarf? Or is the system just too deeply reliant on starting conflicts to ever learn how to finish them? I would love to hear your thoughts on this in the comments. And please make sure to subscribe to this channel and give a like if you found this explainer helpful. Thanks so much for learning with us, and I'll catch you in the next one.